So welcome everybody, and hello to anybody who may be listening to the recording. I can see everybody streaming into the live session now, which is awesome. So my name is Kendall Havenstein, and I'm the Smart Marketing Operations Manager here. I'm based in Sydney, and I take care of this marketing operations for all of Australia and New Zealand. So I will be today's co-host, supporting the presenter in the background. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping slides and then pass it over to today's presenter, and then I'll be back at the end to do a quick wrap up. So today we'll be engaging students in project-based learning, and it is our third webisode of the season, already halfway through. So with your control panel, if you would like to shrink it, you can do so just by clicking on the white and orange arrow. You can shrink it down, and then it'll just shrink down to the grey panel here that you can see here on the right. If you want to pop it back out, you just click on the arrow again. For questions, you can ask questions throughout, and we will also have a short question and answer segment at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions throughout, you can just type your questions into the question panel there. Just click on the arrow, that'll pop it out and open for you on your control panel, and then I will be there to answer any questions. I may save up your question to ask at the end, or if I don't answer it straight away, it's because I know maybe the presenter is about to answer your question naturally as his presenter unfolds. So at the end, you can either type in questions at the end when we have the short question and answer segment. You can either type in your questions and I can read them out to the presenter, or you can come off mute. You can raise your hand and come off mute and ask the presenter that way if you like. So you can earn an attendance certificate for this webinar if you just log into training.smarttech.com. Click on the blue certification box, learn more, and that'll pop out to our webinar library, and you just find this webinar, and then if you click on the mark complete button at the end, which you can see circled down here on the left, and that'll automatically generate you a certificate. So you can go into training.smarttech.com next week, and this webinar will be there, and I also now email out the webinar with the webinar recording with the link at the end. I aim to get those out the following Monday, Tuesday after the webinar. So if any of you have attended our previous two webinars that we've already had, last Wednesday and the Wednesday before, you would have already got that email. Is full of goodies, full of different resources, as well as the webinar recording with the certificate button at the end. Okay, so now I would like to introduce today's presenter. So today I would like to actually welcome back Ben Fasani. Ben is currently working as an education specialist for Pro-AV Solutions Victoria, but before that, his role was a project officer and learning designer at the Teaching and Learning Network. And before that, it was 15 years as across multiple roles at a government secondary college. So he had multiple roles, including a leading teacher in digital technology, a year 7 to 10 music teacher, a VCE music teacher, performance investigation and style composition, a VET certificate 3 in music industry, sound production and trainer and assessor, a VCAL personal development teacher, a VCAL work-related skills teacher, a VET certificate 2 in business skills trainer and assessor, a student manager and coordinator, a school counsellor, staff mentor and coach, and graduate teacher mentor. And Ben also worked with the VCAA as a VCE and VET performance exam assessor, as well as an itinerant teacher in various government and independent primary and secondary schools. So without further ado, I would like to now hand it over to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Hi, Kendall. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm just going to click on show my screen. Sorry, I'm going to turn my phone off. My phone's going a little bit nuts and it shouldn't. So hopefully you are you able to see my screen there?
Yeah,
one with my
good.
Smart Learning Suite online.
Yep.
Is that the one? Good. I just wanted to make sure. All right, so I'm going to get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Engaging Professional Students with Project-Based Learning. My name is Ben Fasani. You have obviously heard about who I am, so I'm not going to spend too much time in this, but my background is in education. While I'm working at Pro-AV as the education specialist, I'm a teacher, still am a registered teacher. I'm going to talk to you today about project-based learning, but not only what it is, I'm going to talk to you about how I have used it in my classroom. So, and so you can get examples of how I've used it, and then I'm going to give you some toolkits to walk away with. Before we begin though, if you want to log in to hellosmart.com and access my room, then there are some elements in here that I've tried to make it interactive. So I'll just give you a second to do that. It's 25875. That's my room number. If you wanted to join in the session, that's fine. Just go to hellosmart.com, join as a guest, use 25875 as my room number, and then just put your name in. That means that if I get people who in this webinar want to engage with some of the, I've got a couple of shouted outs in there. If you want to engage in that, that'd be fantastic. If not, that's okay. I'll just blast through these so you guys can get the information that you've come from. But that's I'm going to move forward with that. So it is 25875 is my classroom number, and all you have to do is go to hellosmart.com and sign in as a guest. But I will move forward. So the learning intention for today is I want us to understand the concept of project-based learning and the theory behind its practice. I want us to be able to understand the strategies, the different strategies where PBL can be applied to our classrooms. I'm going to explore some different approaches to PBL that I have used in my classroom, just so you can get a sense of what I've been talking about and how I've been embedding this into what's happening in my own teaching. And then I've created some tools at the end that you can use and take away to help you embed PBL or project-based learning in your own classroom. Now, I noticed one person's in the room, so I would generally say where your knowledge is at, but I'm just going to move. Oh, there's two people in the room now. I'm still, if we had a few more people, I would probably run this activity, but being that we don't, I might just move past it. But I want you to think about, before we begin, where your knowledge is at in regards to project-based learning. Have you tried using it before? Have you been successful at it? Have you heard of it and you want to explore it? It's just starting to think about your own knowledge and where you're at before we start. So I'm going to divide this presentation into a variety of different sections, and the first one is to understand PBL or project-based learning. Now you'll notice that I will keep speaking as PBL now. It just makes life a lot easier, but you'll find that even when you're going through some of the literacy and you're reading about this movement, it's commonly referred to as PBL. So PBL is project-based learning. But before we can really unpack, before we get into the depths of how you can use it or how I've used it, I think we need to understand what it is. So in part one, I'm going to look at what is project-based learning. For the record, I will make this Smart Learning Suite online activity, the link, I'll give it to Kendall and she can share it with you. So if you want to go back and use this presentation or go back and have a look at this presentation later down the line, you can and use it as a reference. So PBL or project-based learning, it is a teaching method. Now, a lot of people think about, when they say the word project, they think of this idea that at the end of a unit or end of an activity, you do a project or you do something physical or practical, or you do hands-on learning, or you do something where gets the students showing their learning. But project-based learning is an actual teaching method. It's something that engages students with real-world and personally meaningful projects and or activities, and it looks like it's solving a real-world problem or answering complex questions. So it's not just answering a single question or showing a single piece of understanding or knowledge. It's about answering complex questions or real-world problems. It is also spread over an extended period of time. So it can be a week, it can be a semester, it can be a term. You could do a variety of different lengths, whatever suits the project that you're running. But it's not just a one-off activity, or it's not just an end-of-unit activity. It's spread over an extended period of time. It allows students the opportunity to demonstrate skills and knowledge on a topic or a set of topics. And it sees students creating public products or presentation that's given to a real audience. So when I say a real audience, or when the term real audience or public product, it's something that goes outside of the boundaries of the classroom. So you are getting the students to do something that they see as being meaningful, that is going to impact someone else outside of their current learning environment. So if we put it more formally, this quote I've taken from the project-based learning website, but project-based learning is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to authentic, engaging, and complex questions, problems, or a challenge. Now, it's really interesting. I'm going to keep going back to that extended period of time. So you think about it as a project as an ongoing activity. It's not just a one-off. And that's one of the things that I think people get a little bit confused when they're talking about PBL. So why use it? Because it promotes these key elements: deep content knowledge. So when you get students just doing a single project or a single activity, a small project on knowledge, you might have a small depth of knowledge or small depth of exposure to the knowledge that the students can experience. But with PBL, students deep dive into the content knowledge that they're trying to convey to the audience. They have to become experts so that they can then talk about it. So it's a great way of doing that. It gets them to do critical thinking skills and collaboration. So they're working together and they're using critical thinking skills to be able to achieve their outcome. A lot of PBL is particularly student-centered. So with student centers and driving that movement, you get the students developing those key skills of collaboration and critical thinking, but also having the opportunity to work on communication and incorporate their level of creativity to be able to think about how they could tackle a problem in their own personal and unique way. PBL is also big on focusing on reflection and peer feedback. So that idea of you reflect on your own practice and then you use that reflection to drive your future development. So using it as a formative assessment task, but also peer feedback. So using your peers' input and peers' constructive criticism, as I like to use it in my class, that's the term I used to use to help the movement forward of the project. But most important, PBL is about autonomy. It gives students the opportunity to be in the driver's seat with their learning, and it gives them the opportunity to experience that sense of leadership and that sense of ownership. So it's a really cool points about why using PBL. Now, this is the one that I also, this is a great analogy that we talk about with the difference between PBL and your standard class project. The key differences between doing a project and PBL is something that we need to understand to effectively engage this practice in our classroom. So traditionally, your standard project, you could think of it like an ice cream sundae. It's a dessert. So it's something that you have after main course, and the main course is being the lesson unit or content that you have been teaching. PBL isn't the dessert, it is the main course. So you may think about, the use of project in both of those examples can get it a bit confusing, but project-based learning means that the actual project itself is the main course, it is the learning. So it is the pathway that students are working on, are walking down, to achieve an outcome, to develop their project. But the project-based learning is about focusing on all the steps along the journey to achieve that outcome and giving students that depth of knowledge in what they're doing. So PBL, the project itself, is the vehicle for teaching the content, knowledge, and skill to the students. So it does contain curriculum, instruction, and assessment. It's not the summative assessment task, it's actually the vehicle of teaching the content. So hopefully that analogy there of the ice cream sundae helps you to identify what the difference between a standard project and PBL is, because that is one area that people commonly get confused. So some examples that I've got here. So for the dessert, like doing a project, so traditional instruction, you do it on the end of the unit or follows direction of the teacher. It's focused on the product. So something that's the dessert idea of the project is something that just focuses on doing a poster or creating some kind of outcome. However, project-based learning is generally driven by the student, but it's focused on the product and the process, probably the process more importantly to the product, because when students are able to effectively engage in the process, the product sort of sorts itself out. It is aligned to academic standards and skills. The PBL involves collaboration with students and in-class guidance from the teacher. So the teacher becomes, in PBL, less of an instructor and more of a facilitator. So they stand to the side and let the students drive it a little bit more, where the traditional project doesn't necessarily have teacher input as much, because it's at the end of the teacher's instruction and the students are just creating a product. So hopefully this little table here, and I'm not going to go through all of them because you're quite capable of reading it yourself, and hopefully they make sense, but I wanted to show you some clear differences between a project and project-based learning, which is one of the common areas that most people get confused. So in PBL, the project itself is used to teach rigorous academic content and skills. So it's not just something simple. It's actually supposed to be a meaty activity so that students can really develop that academic content and develop the skills associated with it and be really rigorous in that development. So it needs to be, when we're talking about the sort of questions that are used or the sort of focus points, it needs to be something that students can actually dig their teeth deeply into. They need to work hard to answer important questions. An example is, how can we impact connection at our school? Now, that is a question that I use for PBL in one of my examples that I'll talk about later. But it needs to be a big question that students, and an open-ended question, so that students can come at it from multiple different answers, multiple different directions is the word I'm looking for. Also, by extending the project over a couple of weeks, students become immersed in the learning activity. They pursue their answers from different angles. Even if they're working at a point and they get to a dead end, they haven't got a very short timeline where they have to go, oh, well, I can't do anything about it now. They actually have, over a long extended period of time, the opportunity to go back and maybe tackle the project from a different angle and develop and experience a whole new learning outcome as well from doing that. So that process, students can apply what they've learned in really meaningful ways. Your instruction as a teacher changes. It can be incorporated into the project, and it's designed to meet appropriate academic goals and standards. So it's not something that you do first. You actually might take a presentation that you have and divide it into multiple parts, and then intersperse that through the students doing the project so that you can use that instruction to facilitate their continued growth and development. And the project work creates a genuine need for students to learn from grade level or content skills while working collaboratively, thinking critically, and engaging in reflection and revision. So that's that idea that it's all these different pedagogical approaches wrapped into one great activity. At the end of a project, so at the end of your timeline, so however long you set your project for, and let me just stop for a second and say, project-based learning isn't an activity that goes for a minimum of 1 week. It's about having multiple opportunities or multiple exposures to this one project where students can experience their learning and then develop on that towards a goal. So it doesn't have to be a set amount of time. It's what a time you think is most appropriate for students to achieve the learning outcomes that you want them to achieve in that activity. So when I'm talking about at the end of a set period of time, it is really a fluid concept driven by you as the expert teacher. But at the end of the project, students' work is shared publicly. So it's beyond just the classmates of their teachers. So for example, I've got a sample there. Students in a STEM project might create a sustainable redesign for a public space and present it to the school leadership or school council, rather than just simply presenting it to the school or working from a textbook or creating a poster for a classroom wall. It's actually, their work is then presented to a body that can enact their ideas, or hopefully will enact and give them an opportunity to take it to the next level. Another example is social studies student could explore historical and present day community heroes and present their findings in a public forum through a role play presentations. Now, an example of that is my school used to do a thing called Night of the Notables. So what students would do is they would use the PBL to identify a particular notable figure in history. They would then deep dive into understanding that resource and understanding that person, understanding their experience and the impact they made in the world. Then they would create a little human-sized diorama, for want of a better term, where they would be the character and dress up like them, create a bit of a little diorama, almost like I'm standing in here in my little cocoon. And once they had created that, we would do a presentation night where parents would walk around and they would act and role play in their character. So that was over, I think, a 3-week period, and it happened with Year 7. So that's an example of what you could do. But all of these, by making a main course out of project learning, students are becoming more deeply engaged in their work. Like in that Night of the Notables example, the characters had to, when they were in character during the Night of the Notables, where people were walking around and experiencing these human-sized dioramas, that they had to be in character. So for them to all be in character, they had to understand how they may speak, or they had to understand what they may have done. So if someone came and asked them a question about what they contributed to the world, they could actually be in character and rattle off the information and share that with others. So it's actually quite exciting. It's a great project, and it allows students to develop skills that set them up for success. Now, it says in college, but I mean as in university, in career and life, in moving forward in the future. So that's what project-based learning is. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you're sitting there going, oh, okay, I get this. Now I'm going to talk about how can I use PBL in my classroom. There are some, and these are some strategies and these are some tools that you can use as a teacher, and guidelines that can help you make really effective PBL activities in your classroom. Now, PBL Works is a fantastic website. It's an organization that drives this project-based learning movement, and it's developed a research-informed model to ensure that you can get referred to as what they call gold standard. Now, the model encompasses two different sides, or two guidelines. The first one is essential project design elements, and the second one is project-based teaching practices. So these two guides can be used to really help you and your students immerse yourself in project-based learning. Now, I'm going to show you these and talk about these 7, because I think if you are running a project-based learning activity or in your classroom and it's new to you, these guidelines can really help you to enhance and develop that practice. If you are thinking about developing it, they can be a really great framework for you to use when you are planning and developing it. And if you are already using PBL and you haven't heard of these before, you could use them to help enhance and further develop what you're doing. It's a fantastic structure and a platform. So we're going to look at the gold standard PBL for the essential project design elements first. So the 7 ones, this is a design framework for developing your high quality projects for your classroom. So the first one is about a challenging problem or question. The project is framed by a meaningful problem, and it's something that needs to be solved by the students, okay? Or it's a key complex question that needs to be answered. So as a teacher, when you are developing, a great way is to get students embedded in this and how it's supposed to work is students need to identify their own key question that they want to investigate. Of course, you're going to need to narrow that down by providing an overall topic or theme. So you may be looking at sustainability or environmental issues, and then students then will create their own challenging question. They might have their own interest that they can then use to drive the project. You as the teacher would also want to work with the student to make sure that there is an appropriate level of challenge for the student. So some students don't bite off more than they can chew, and also some students don't take a bit of a relaxed approach. So a challenging problem or question is the first part that's really important for your design element. The second is it's about sustained inquiry. Students engage in the rigorous and extended process of posing questions, such as posing the posing questions, finding resources and applying information. So it needs to be something that they can spread out over time, okay? And so the question needs to be obviously big enough for them to be able to probe multiple points and to really sink their teeth into that question. Authenticity. The project needs to be in a real world context. So it could be a task or a tool. And quality standards or the project speaks to personal concerns, interests, and issues that's in the students' lives. So it's about giving students not necessarily hypotheticals, but giving them a problem that they want to solve that is either personal to them, that is a real world context, that actually has their own, they're very interested in, or has issues that they're really concerned about. So it has to be authentic. It needs to be something that they students see as real. Now, there's an example going around with the war on waste. Now, I love that as a platform, and I use that a lot in my teaching, not as a music teacher, but as a VCAL teacher. But in the war on waste, there was a story in the newer episodes of a young student who used PBL, and she used that project to try and get rid of straws. And she worked with the ABC and the presenter from the War on Waste to try and create this movement to get rid of plastic straws. And as you can see, that movement is actually working because we are having places that are removing straws. So it started with a real world context and something that she was very passionate about. And then she drove that and actually got connected to the right people to make some sustainable change. So it's about real world context. It's really important that you make the project authentic and it's authentic to the student. So also be mindful, it's not about what's authentic to you, it's authentic to the student. It's something that really you want them to be really driven and really invested in so they can engage in what they're doing. Student voice is also very important in PBL. You want to allow students to make some decisions about the project. So you want them to include how they work and what they create, how they express their own ideas and their own voice. So once you've got your topic and your question and you've made it, you know it's authentic, then give students some choice as to how they present it. Are they going to go down the traditional presentation that they're just going to present in a PowerPoint stand-up or in a webinar like I'm doing, or are they going to do something a little bit more creative? So allow them to be have that voice and have that drive. That's really, really important. A key element is also reflection. You need to embed opportunities for you as the teacher and students to reflect on the learning, the effectiveness of their inquiry and their project activities. You need to think about the quality of the work, any obstacles that arise and strategies to overcome them. So it's about students not just doing and not just experiencing the journey, but it's also along the way reflecting on that as a formative assessment task so that they can then learn from decisions that they've made and the path that they're on to try and inform their continued movement towards their goal. Critique and revision. So students give and receive feedback, and this is also really important that you have students feeding back to each other thoughts. And I used to use this a lot in my classes as a music teacher, and I'll talk about it later, but in music performances where students would perform a piece to the class at the end of a rehearsal just to show a work in progress, I would have students give what I called constructive criticism. And this idea, and I'll address how this is PBL later, but this element here is I get the students to give their ideas of what they think the students could do better or could tweak in their presentation of the music, which was their project, to improve it. And the reason, my reasoning that I presented to the students, I said, who better to give feedback to a student who's doing work than another student who's doing the same sort of activity, who's doing the same sort of project. So someone who has first-hand experience in the project or in doing a project to give critique and feedback to others doing a project of the same or similar styles. This is such a really powerful tool and allows students to use that constructive criticism or revision to think outside of their box and to think about what they're doing from a different point of view. And finally, the public product. Students make their project work public by sharing it with, explaining it, presenting it to people beyond the classroom. PBL is about expanding outside of the walls of the classroom, and that's really important because then it sort of brings a level of realism and authenticity to the work. So it's not just happening inside the classroom walls, it's stretching out into something bigger. And the audience is someone who they might not necessarily come into contact with on such a regular basis like they would their classmates. So that's the design side. Now we're going to have a look at the teaching practices side. Yet again, there are 7 here. So the challenging problem question, again, teachers create and adapt a project for their context and students. You plan its implementation from launch to culmination while allowing for some degree of student voice and choice. So you can't obviously just allow students to go willy-nilly off on their own because you'll end up with everyone going on all different tangents. You do need to set some sort of parameters or some sort of criteria that students need to follow when they're designing their project and their direction, but leave enough room in there, wiggle room for students to actually make some choices. So it might be creating a marking rubric and giving that to the students so that they can use that rubric, and if you've designed it in a specific way that highlights the caveats that they need to meet when they're working along their project. That can actually help you to rein it in a little bit. Align to standards. So you need to use standards to plan the project and make sure it's addressing the key knowledge and understanding from the subject area that's to be included or that you're teaching. So when you're planning this, you have your knowledge and your key knowledge and your understanding, your standards there, and make sure that your plan is constantly mapping and constantly mapped to those key knowledge and understanding. That way that your project at the end can very clearly be mapped against the standards that you need to address as a teacher. Build the culture. So as a teacher, you need to explicitly and implicitly promote student independence and growth. So that also, you need to develop their sense of autonomy, and that can come with some conflict. So when you get some students working in a group on a project, you know, you might get people who don't necessarily understand the concept of negotiating. So you might need to work on building that culture of getting students to go, that's okay for you to disagree. Disagreement is okay. But it's about then negotiating and trying to find a common ground for the project and the team to keep moving forward. So that way that they can develop their independence as students, but also their ability as independent people to working in a group and to grow that. You need to build the culture of open-ended inquiry so that not having a defined answer, a yes-no answer is a good thing, that it's open-ended, it can go in any direction, and different people's ideas can be very, very powerful. Team spirit and attention to quality. So you're building that idea of together. There's a great saying that Shonda Rhimes, who is a TV screenwriter, she wrote Grey's Anatomy, she did a TED talk and she said, go fast, go alone, go far, go together. Now, I thought that was a really great quote. And that idea of, you know, we want to go far with this project, you know, so we want to do it as a team, and we want to go, you know, so we've got to look about what is it about working in teams and allowing for other people's ideas and opinions and those sort of things. So talking about that culture and including that in your instruction. The next one we're talking about is like managing activity. So teachers work with students to organize tasks and schedules. Now, schedules is the really big one, so timelines. So you want to set checkpoints and deadlines. You don't want to, yes, we're doing open-end exploration, but you need to have some sort of task timeline and task deadline so that students actually can work towards achieving some sort of outcome. That's really important. And find resources, create products and make them public. So we need to have an end product and an end date. So having those timelines and managing those activities is really, really important. And you need to plan that, how you are going to approach that, and how you're going to teach the students that. Scaffolding student learning is another important part. So you employ a variety of lessons, tools, instruction strategies to support all students in reaching the project goals. So instead of doing it like a present and then your main course in ice cream, think about how you can do a little bit, present an element and then let them go off and work on it. And then you scaffold on that session that you did before and the experience they've had with the new element. And you interdisperse your teaching and your instruction into the session and into the lesson and the project journey. Assessing the students' learning, it is important that you use formative and summative assessment tasks of the knowledge and understanding, and success skills to include self and peer assessment of team and individual work. So you want a student's assessment to be a combination of your assessment and your understanding, obviously mapped against the rubric, but also their own self-assessment about how they think they're going with meeting their project, and peer assessment. So you can even go to not just peer outside of the group, you can go peer within the group as well. So you can end up with theoretically 4 levels of assessment that can combine together to make the student's result for this project. Engage and coach. So teachers engaging in learning and creating, you do it alongside the students. So you do it with them. So get involved in their projects, and then students, they can identify you as being a part of the project, and they can help to lead you. It also can help you when you're inferring and teaching them how to do that. But it also helps you identify when students need particular skill building, when they need redirection and encouragement, and the other thing that a lot of the time we forget is when we need celebration. When students have worked towards a goal and maybe they've met a goal, celebrating that is really important, because as I used to say to my students, when they taste success, because it tastes so delicious, they get the motivation to keep going, and they want to keep tasting success. So they have that motivation to keep working towards achieving those goals. So maybe it's also about, when you engage and coach them, creating a series of small short-term goals as part of your timeline so that the students can taste success along the way and keep motivating them towards achieving that final outcome. So they're the structures around PBL that have been presented by PBL Works, and they're a fantastic tool for you to use. So I've been talking about what it is and how it's built. Now I'm going to give you some examples of what I used to do into my classroom, so you can see that I'm not just talking about theory, I've actually put this into practice. So Kendall mentioned at the beginning that I was VCAL, which stands a teacher, which is Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning, or VCAL. Now, VCAL is an alternative stream to your traditional Year 11-12 course in Victoria, and it's for students who might want to go on to doing a TAFE course, into an apprenticeship, into workplace training. It allows students to do Year 11 and 12 while also incorporating work-based skills that prepares them for their career path. Now, one of the subjects that I taught was called personal development, and I did that at the Year 11 level. And the purpose of personal development in VCAL, it's to develop student knowledge, skills, and attributes that lead to self-development and community engagement. So through family, social, community, environmental responsibilities, it develops resilience, self-esteem, and efficiency, and health and well-being. Value participation in a democratic society. So it's about getting students to think outside of themselves. And it's a perfect place for you to do project-based learning. So I did. Well, what I did is I had the group of VCAL students that I had were actually quite challenging. So there were some students in there who were whose reading, literacy, and numeracy levels were really low. I had some students with behavioural issues. I had some students who couldn't see the point and truancy issues. I couldn't see the point of school. So I had quite a challenging cohort of students. And approaching learning with a PBL focus really allowed these students to become engaged and get excited about the learning. Now, these are just some of the projects that we did. Now, these projects were developed the project guidelines were developed around the students' interests. So we started talking about this is what we need to achieve. We need to achieve team working skills, and we need to achieve a hands-on learning approach to embedding the ideas that we've talked about in PBL before. So I said, what are you guys interested in? Now, I put up some ideas like the radio show. Some students, we were really interested in sharing their understanding and their passion. Like I had one student who really loved movies. He was really passionate about movies. He watched movies all the time. He went to new releases and he wanted to share his knowledge, and he wanted to do it like a review. However, unfortunately, his literacy and numeracy skills was so low that writing a blog or writing some sort of tool that allowed him to share those with a wider community outside meant that he wouldn't necessarily have the success that we wanted. So we talked about adopting that into a radio show, which became a podcast. He talked about how he liked to listen to podcasts, so he actually started to record his own podcast. So using the recording studio, we set him up, and he every week would review new movies, old movies. He would incorporate some audio from little clips from the movies and some trailers, and he'd talk about them. So it was an opportunity for him to have his passion about movies and creating a review process through recording that was then published online in a public forum under a pseudonym, but in a public forum where he would then broadcast those and people would give comments and feedback, and he'd start this dialogue around a whole variety of different movies. And it was a great way for him to really engage in the learning. Now, he also had some issues with school truancy, and when it came to the class where he was doing this ongoing project that he would plan and record and plan, research, record the podcast, and then publish them, he was coming to these lessons each week. I even had him one day where he was away for a lesson because he was unwell. He came the next day when he was supposed to be somewhere else, and I think he was supposed to be doing his part-time job, but he had a shift off. He came and said, Ben, can I do my podcast today to make up for the one I missed yesterday? He became so immersed in the activity that it was actually helping him to really develop his skills. Another one was the copy center. Now, I put this up as an idea. Students wanted to develop their business idea, and they wanted to run a business, and they were trying to think of how could they run a business at school. And one of the ideas was running a copy center at school, like a mini Officeworks, like you see the copy center at Officeworks, but doing it at school. So where teachers could actually book jobs and they wanted enlargements or laminating and they wanted stapling or book creation, they would book it with these students, and these students would take those orders would then actually go up to the school copies and make them, and then would charge the each department how much it costs. So they were actually running a business. So they were doing the job, and they were actually the ones who were scheduling each other on with different times throughout the week, and then they were doing the accounting side of it as well. Had another student who wanted to do a business but wasn't engaged in the copy center idea. She was very much into personal training. So she was working with, she had got clients within school, their teachers, and she was creating personal training plans for these teachers after doing an assessment and after doing meetings with them, would create little videos that were then used to guide the teachers on their personal training. So I was able to, the student was able to take the business idea and then really incorporate their own drive and their own interest. The other one was I had some students who were interested in building stuff, and they wanted to really make a difference, a physical difference to the school. So we had this really derelict area in the middle of the school, and they called it the Eco Garden, and they actually got some sand. We talked to the school and got a budget. They had made a presentation of their plan, presented it to the school. The school then gave them some money, and they started to build this area and turn it into a nice garden. That also happened with the canteen upgrade. Some students we had this nice big canteen, but it was really big. It was like a barn, and the students thought it was boring at lunchtime. They wanted to do some interesting stuff in there. So they built benches, they built a barbecue area, they built a giant chessboard, they had giant Jenga. So they had a table tennis board, a table tennis table put in. So they used their interest in changing for the community, changing things for their school community to make it a much more connected and better place for the students. Another example is the craft packs. So I had some students who really loved craft, but they wanted to share their love of craft with some kids who didn't get the opportunity to experience it. So what they did is they designed a craft activity. They then packaged together all the different elements of that craft activity into packs with instructions, photo instructions, and then we sent them to an orphanage that we had a link to overseas. And that way the students were able to then plan and design a craft outcome that would make the difference, make the change, make the difference for somebody else's life outside of their community. All of this had to be presented, obviously, to school leadership that was approved. How I did this, it was about planning, executing, and then reflecting. So I made sure that I mapped. So you can see here, I've got the elements, which are the elements of the VCAL course, and then I mapped it against how I was going to do the plan and how I was going to do the execution of the project. So it's really important that you keep aligning it to the curriculum. The planning part I did is in class at the start. So it was what I did at the start, and I got them then making their decisions and their choices using some specific guides that I had created that allowed them the flexibility to make their own decisions, but directed them towards using particular techniques, so that I could also, I can make sure that I map the learning against the curriculum, but I could also assess it. So using a SWOT analysis, which is your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So using those analysis to what's going to get in their way and try to foresee some issues that they might face. Got them to create timelines, and I used these tools to do it. Once they had planned it, they just went and did it. So that's one example. I've got 3 examples that I want to talk about, and I am mindful of time. Another one as a music teacher was the music tour. So I used to run a music tour every year where I'd take the students. I wanted to give the students an opportunity to develop their performance skills through experience and real life experience, not just playing school concerts. There was a variety of music performances scattered throughout the year, lunchtime performances, the end of semester performances for family. But the centerpiece of the performance development was the music tour, where we would take a music show on the road and play to communities that they would never have interacted with in the past. So we did a lot of primary schools, we did a lot of community centers, and we played it in rural areas that don't get the opportunity to see live music as often as we may do in a major city. However, this tour, I took a PBL approach to the way it was planned, the way it was executed, and I put the students at the center of the learning activity. So the first thing that I did is I started a leadership program in the music department, which later on became the school adopted and actually brought into the entire school. But I created music captains very early on probably about 2006. 2006 is when I created them, music leaders, and they played a big role in the decisions that were made for the students in the music department. Now, one of those was the route. So when it came to choosing the route, the student leaders would go out and talk to the students who were had access to the music tour and would ask them, what should we do, where would we go? Then they would be the voice of those students inside of the planning meeting. So they would sit there, and those leaders would play a key role in developing plans as to where we would go. And you could see that we went out towards Adelaide, we've done the Great Ocean Road, we went all the way up past towards equal with Sydney, went all the way out to Malakuta, we went down to Tasmania. So these are the choices that students made. Once we had made those choices, I then worked with the leadership team. Now, I took a lot of the lead here because of the planning and legalities of it, but then the leadership team had their key function and role in this planning was about working with me to choose activities, to think about, all right, where are we going to go for dinner? What sort of cuisines are we going to need? And how are we going to go about the budgeting and planning? So we worked together as a team on the planning of the project, and their outcome was the actual itinerary and the project, the music tour itself, and it was presented to leadership. It was also presented to the parents of the students that were going. A second layer to that was I had some students, and we had a uniform when we went on the tour, so every tour had its own jumper and a hoodie, and I had some students who were really keen around the design element. So their project was about designing the jumper, getting the jumper manufactured, making sure that the product outcome that went to the students met school approval ratings, school leadership approval. It captured the voice of the tour. It captured a whole lot of elements. They had to develop and design and produce this the hoodie. So you can see here some of the examples, and you notice Out and Back tour, that was created because we went to the Outback. And we went up to one of the early trips, we went up to Broken Hill and Menindee, an Aboriginal community, and we went out and came back. That was an interesting play on words, so that was adopted like that for a little while. So you can see I had some students who took the project that they took, project element of the entire music tour was the design and production of the jumper. And all of these took lots of different lengths of time. On the actual tour itself, the running of the tour, I moved to some of the students' hands. So I had a tour manager. So one year, every year I'd have students, sometimes it was 2 students or 1, who would work as a tour manager. They were the ones who were like 2IC. At the end of the day, as the teacher in charge, taking students on a camp is always lying with me. But they were the ones who would liaise with the places where we were performing and would talk to the teacher. They would come in with me and they would organise where staff and students are going to sit when we went out for dinner. They would come and collect and distribute the food. So they would play a really big role in managing the overall tour. They would also help me in allocating students to rooms whenever we stopped every night. Stage managers were in control of the performance itself. So arranging the bands and the artists in order, making sure that there was a nice flow of the performance and the performance was the best possible quality it could. That was the element of the project they took on board. I took a vet cruise, so I took a group of students who were in charge of setting up the PA, making sure the microphones worked, running the PA, all the audio stuff. So they were in charge of that, and I had that group of students were then setting up and packing up and making sure all the equipment was there. I also had a photographer, I had a student who was interested in videography and photography. Their project was about capturing the essence of the tour through moving or still image. So the tour itself was the vessel, but you can see I've embedded lots of little different PBL or projects inside it. And then we obviously had the students who would perform. So different people had different levels or depths of project, and they don't always have to be the same. It had to do with matching the level of project and the depth of project to the student who was doing it and allowing them to experience that. A third example that I'm going to talk about is the SEED program. Now, this is where I worked with a media department to run a media SEED program, so getting primary school students introduced to creating film. So this program was PBL because it taught students about the key elements behind making a film. So what they did is they actually made a film. They planned and designed a film. So they did the film and music design and planning. Then they did the production where it was shooting scenes and they were writing the music. And then the third was post-production. So it was editing footage, syncing the music, exporting the product and publishing. Now, this was a primary school project at the secondary, used at our secondary school facilities. Because there was a lot of students doing this, we broke it down into what called a jigsaw activity. So every different student group was given a, after we had planned the overall theme of the story, they were all given different themes, so that we had students all actively engaging in different parts of the movie that were then clipped together at the end to create an overall scene. Because of that, there was no dialogue. We were just focusing on the practical elements of the production, not the language text. However, if you wanted to do this, you could extend the project by having students write a script. We didn't do that. So we then developed the scene structure, broke it down, and each group then had a basic idea of what their scene needed to, the outcome it needed to be. Then they went away and shot it, planned, designed it, shot it, and then after they had shot the scene, we then designed some music for their scene to support the emotional content. At the end, we put all those scenes together to create a movie. And then we put that on a DVD and it went home to the parents, and it was actually shown at the primary school presentation night. So what you ended up with is you ended up with the students' product of the film actually being showcased at a variety of different places for a variety of different audiences. The students were really immersed in it and really engaged in it, and they had a huge amount of input into things like costume design, direction, all those sort of elements, location for the scene, what was in the scene, how they were going to achieve their scene's outcomes. So you could see there how we were able to create guidelines that really directed and focused their development while giving them a huge amount of wiggle room inside to explore their own voice and have their own personality come out. Oh, the last one I want to talk about is music performance. As a VCE music teacher, it's really important that students have the opportunity to perform music that speaks directly to them. Now, as an assessor and as a teacher, I've seen a lot of students, one after another, who present the same program of work. And that, to me, when I see students present exactly the same program of work in an exam, one after another, that shows that the program hasn't been developed by the student, it's been given to them. I didn't want to approach my teaching that way. So I use music performance as, particularly for the VCE, Year 11 and 12 students, as a PBL model. So whether it was group or solo performances, I gave the students the criteria of what they needed to make sure that their music met. However, the music in which they chose was completely their choice. So when at the end of year or any performances that happen, I would have, or anytime we'd have rehearsal performances, so at the end of a prac lesson, students would present some of their work to the class for constructive criticism. You would have a heavy metal song, I had hip hop, I had pop, I had funk, I had jazz, I had classical, so I had a huge variety of students playing a huge variety of pieces of music in my classroom, because I was encouraging them to take control of the pieces. Now, when they would choose a piece, I would have a discussion with them to make sure that it met the criteria, but I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't give pieces to them. I might give them hints. So if someone says, oh, we want to play this style of music, I don't know anybody, I might point them in the direction, say, oh, have you heard of the Foo Fighters? Go and have a listen to them, see if you like anything, which may lead them on to somewhere else. But they had complete control or autonomy over the program that they chose. Any arrangements, so they also had the choice to identify, when you're listening to a piece of music, you might not have the instruments in your band to replicate it exactly. So they had choice as to what they thought was important, what they didn't think was important, and who played what parts. So they were arranging the music. Even their rehearsals, they ran their rehearsals, they organized when they were going to be run, and they arranged to make sure that everybody who needed to be at the rehearsal was at the time that they needed to be. And then finally, I got them to present their music in a variety of different spaces. So the music tour was one of them. Lunchtime concerts, I was taking students to perform out in the community all the time. So they had an opportunity to choose which of those avenues they wanted to explore, which avenue they wanted to present their product or their project in. So they didn't have to do them all. It was an opportunity that they needed to do I'd say you need to perform at least once a semester. That was my matching it to the curriculum and to the success criteria or your rubric. But As to which of those presentations or performances they chose was completely up to them. And as a result, students became so engrossed in what they were developing that they ended up performing lots and lots of times. It did end up being a lot more work for me, I guess, organizing and managing all those performances, but it was really valuable from a teaching point of view to watch the students be so immersed in what they were doing. So my final part is where to from here, and I'm mindful that there's only 5 minutes left and Kendall's floating with that her finger on the mouse button to take back control. But I just want to give you 6 steps to help you get started with PBL in your classroom. I'm not going to necessarily read all these out to you or unpack them all, but think about step 1 is to start with an essential question. So it must engage your students. So you know your students really well. So think about what is an essential question that you could pose to them that would get them thinking and that might actually trigger an interesting discussion or trigger them to start talking about their interest. Design a plan for your project. It is essential that you have in mind the standards that you're going to be addressed. So when you're planning it, make sure you're mapping it towards those standards. That's really, really important. It is also important for step 3 that you create a schedule. Give students and yourself a timeline to work towards. That's really, really important to make sure that you can achieve particular goals and that at the end you end up with a product. I have had some projects where I didn't necessarily set a strict structure or timeline, and the product didn't get to the its completion as we would want it to. So setting a schedule and sticking to it is really, really important. Step 4 is monitoring the students' progress. So it's to maintain control without preventing students from taking responsibility of their work. So it's important that you want them to take responsibility, but you do need to maintain control so that you can keep directing them forward, and so they're always moving towards that end goal. So there's some tips there to help you do that. Assessing the outcome. So in parallel to your teacher-based assessments, give your students the opportunity to conduct self-assessment. So write that into your plan. Work out ways in which you can embed that self-assessment and peer assessment into the assessment elements of your project and put that into your plan. And then evaluate the experience. Designate a time for reflection of daily activities. So at the end of your session, give students the opportunity, maybe through a journal, they can write a reflection journal about how they think today's project went. It can be really helpful. Also, a group reflection or a discussion can be really, really helpful to get students to learn from their experiences. In this, I'm not going to go through these, but I put in here a couple of slides with lots of different dot points that you might use to trigger some ideas of how you might use PBL in your classroom. For example, a good fun one could be TED Talks. Get students to get up there and do a TED Talk about something that they feel like they have a lot of skill and experience in. That can be a lot of fun. You can video it and then maybe put it on your school intranet for other students to see, and that could be a bit of fun as well. But there's a lot of different examples here, and I'll send Kendall the link to this SLSO session so you can go back and look at this. So you can see I've got another whole page here. So have a look through these and see if they can trigger any ideas that might be helpful to you. Now I'm going to say any questions. I am going to hand back to Kendall now, but I am just going to, while Kendall hopefully turns her camera back on, I do want to say thank you very much. We've passed the shout it out. Thank you very much for today. Hopefully you got a lot out of that session. There was a lot in there, but hopefully it's going to trigger. You now understand what PBL is. You can understand how you can use it and how you can build a course. But there's some examples and models of how I've used it in my own teaching.
Awesome.
Thank you, Kendall.
Thanks, Ben. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, no questions have come through just yet. I think everyone was intently listening like I was. I particularly liked the radio show story. That was a good story. That was awesome.
Oh, that was an interesting one because the student was so passionate about it. But I saw the limitations around the literacy and numeracy skills. Like he was a year 11 student whose literacy skills was actually at a grade 5 level. So for him, I wanted him to taste some success. So it was that idea of using a podcast. He just loved it. You know, he ended up looking. He created an element of his podcast that was about Indian movies and international movies. So he would do your box office, and then he was actually going to do something that was a little bit culturally different. So it really encouraged him to open up his flavour and his thinking as well.
Yeah, they just, it's a channel for them to channel their passions, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
awesome. And radio shows, now podcasts, it's all the same principles. So it's so relevant today is
Absolutely.
probably how long ago did you do that project?
I did that project 2018.
Okay. So
that
yeah, so
that
super relevant skills for, for them to have that now.
Oh, absolutely. So they and that student doing that podcast actually triggered some other students doing theirs. So I ended up doing three different podcasts and 3 different channels. It was really
Lots of fun.
really exciting.
And we do have a question come through from Eleanor.
Yep.
Any idea on how to incorporate PBL in psych? I want to say PHYSED.
Oh, it could be physical education.
PE, psych, yeah, physical education, physical ED, yeah.
So physical education, it could be thinking about students who have a particular skill set at sport. Like when I was at school, when I was a student, I played baseball. Now, baseball wasn't exactly a mainstream sport, still isn't in Australia. But if you have an opportunity for a student to maybe start a baseball team, or there's a t-ball team or a softball team at a primary school where they can maybe design a training program that they can then go and implement on a regular basis with those kids and coach the students, suddenly you've got their interest and their ability to plan training schedules. They have to organize their time, they have to go and execute it, and then they're actually coaching the kids and taking the kids off to, and I'm using softball as an example, it can be any game, but taking that as an inter-school sport. So that's maybe a project that you could do. Could be also like I did with the student who wanted to do the business and do personal training. You could go and run some sort of fitness class and get them to think about maybe linking up with a local elderly centre and maybe what they could plan an activity, a training regime that they go and run once a week for people in the elderly community. So that actually they'd have to think about the sort of exercises that they can actually do that suit the purpose. And that can be really help them to think about human movement and something like that as well. There's some ideas.
Yeah, that's some great ideas. That's some great ideas. I hope that helps out Eleanor. And Eleanor's written, in our school, we usually have fun day planned by the year 12s. Interesting.
Well, that's it. And that's project-based learning on itself.
Can you consider that PBL she's written? Yeah.
You can. But I also think it's about, in an activity like that, where you've got the fun day planned by the year 12s, a lot of the time, though, the focus is on the outcome, not necessarily on the journey. So PBL is about, yes, the outcome is important, but the journey is the same, just as, if not more important, for the students. So if the planning process of that fun day is there's just as much focus on the actual process of planning itself, then it is PBL. But it's just about making sure that it's not just focusing on the end goal.
Yeah, awesome. And that music tour, that was when did you do that? How long ago was that?
So I started that in 2012, and
okay.
I stepped out of the classroom in 2018. So it ran. Sorry, tell me something. I started the tour in 2007, not 2012. Apologies. The first year was in 2012, and it ran for 12 years. So 2007 for 12 years. I did it every year for 12 years. When I stepped out of the school in 2018, the school, I did it one more year, and unfortunately they're not running that program anymore. But yeah, it was a successful program for 12 years, and we were able to not only use it as a project-based learning task, but it was also teaching the students global citizenship, because I was getting them to use their music to take, and we were taking it to communities that don't get it, and they were experiencing music in a way that they hadn't experienced. They were using music to give experiences to people that don't necessarily get that opportunity.
Yeah, the skills they would learn on that's just awesome. And kudos to you as well. That's a huge project to take on, but so much fun. So much
amazing
fun. And
I appreciate it. It was amazingly rewarding, and that's the final thing I'm going to say, because I know you're wrapping me up there. I love to chat about this stuff, and I can talk about it all day.
Eleanor's got another question. Eleanor's got one more question. Is there a planning and timeline? Do you have a suggested timeline? Sorry, I might be reading that wrong. There is a planning and timeline for that. Do you have a suggested timeline?
Well, the answer to that is how long is a piece of string? Because it really depends on, and I know Eleanor's sitting there going, that doesn't help me, but it's really about the depth of learning that you want to create, the depth of learning that's actually capable, the capabilities of your students. So there's no point in having a project that you're going to go for 2 months when one of the students really struggles, has a learning deficit and has struggles, and they're not going to be able to maintain that level of intensity and rigor. So it's about personalizing the length. And sometimes the dates, like the music tour, the school said this is when you're going on music tour. So I had a finite date that I had to meet. So it had to be, obviously, there you're going on music tour, so I needed to have the parents pay, and so there was a set of things that meant that this was my timeline. So if you were using, Eleanor asked the PE question, so if you were using your students plan and develop a training regime for a primary school sporting team, the deadline would be when round robin sports are in the school. And so then you use that deadline and then work back from there. But I think it's depends on the activity you use, the activity that you run, the students that you use, those sort of things. But it's about, my email's here and my details are were on the screen. If you want to give me a call, feel free to, and we can talk about it. But I think it's very much how long is a piece of string.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And I will be sending out Ben's presentation Monday, Tuesday. It'll come out in the resources, the post-webinar resources email that all registrants get. Eleanor said, thank you, Eleanor. And Eleanor is coming from, she looks like she's in New Zealand. So hello from Australia, and thanks for joining, Eleanor. And I will, that looks like the last questions and comments that have come through now.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I will now hand it back over to Kendall. I know she's got some wrap-up things to do, but thank you. But explore PBL. My final thing is it's really rewarding. The joy and power that you see from the students really engaging in their learning is such a powerful motivator for you as a teacher, but also for them in their learning. It's so rewarding. Just give it a go.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And thanks again,
Kendall,
for coming and hosting a webinar for us. Okay, so if you would like some free resources, you can do so by going on to content.smarttech.com, and then you can search by grade or by subjects, and that's on the Smart Exchange that we also call SMEX. You probably hear us, I jump between Smart Exchange and SMEX. So you can go on there and find some free classroom resources. And then we have our Smart 360 platform. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I'd definitely encourage you to jump in and check that out. You can get there by going to smarttech.com/360. Now that has loads of professional development resources. We have an auditorium that's got keynotes from some popular global keynote presenters, including George Couros, who we had last year at our Inspire Greatness conference. And we also have breakout sessions as well, mini workshop sessions, which we keep up to date. The content's kept up to date all the time, to keep up to date with what's going on and what teachers and what educators would like. So we also have an exhibit hall, which is exactly like what you'd get in real life. It's a virtual exhibit hall that breaks the beast that is smart into booths. So it's an awesome way just to navigate instead of going to the smarttech.com website. Smart 360 Exhibit Hall is just another way to navigate around the different parts, different arms of Smart. So right now up on the screen, I've got the at-home education and gaming's booth. And as you can see, there's a menu underneath each booth where you can navigate through all the resources. And you can also click on the sign panels as well, and that takes you to various resources as well. And then you've also got our Australian booth. So if you jump in there, you've got all our ANZ webinar series. So this is all the series that you're attending right now. It's got all the past webisodes in there, all the past recordings, and you can also come in there and chat to me. And it was kind of funny because there actually seems to be a character in there that the whole team, ANZ team, laughed because it actually looks like me, but that was not intentional. But you can jump on in there and say hello, and you can also connect to our Facebook as well, which has loads of content weekly. I update our ANZ Facebook page. So if you can, so anyone who missed this at the beginning, you can also download an attendance certificate for this webinar if you log into train.smarttech.com and then navigate to the recording when you go to train.smarttech.com, and click on the certification box. It'll pop out to our webinar library. You can just navigate to this webinar, then click on the Mark Complete button at the end, and then that will automatically generate you a PDF certificate. Monday, Tuesday next week, I now also do send out a post-webinar email to all registrants. So if you're listening to this recording, you'll get this as well, and all the attendees attending live right now. You will get an email Monday, Tuesday, and that will have Ben's presentation with Ben's contact details on there at the last slide, and then you'll also get a recording link to this webinar with the certificate linked at the end. Okay, so also coming up, we are very excited to announce the date of our Inspire Greatness Conference 2021. It'll be the 5th year in a row. We're very excited to bring that to you. We're in the planning stages at the moment, locking in all the content in, the venue in, and we're hoping to make an announcement for the venue and the agenda in June, July. And so save the date. It's September 10th. It's Friday. It's a Friday, and will be able to access this virtually if you can't attend live, but we definitely encourage you to attend live to the face-to-face event if you can get there, but we will have it available for on-demand after the live event as well for those people who can't make it. So that is our 3rd webisode down. So that is halfway through the season. So we've just had our engaging students in project-based learning, and then next week we will be going through special needs students, SLS, and zones of regulation. So I will be back again, and we'll have an educator hosting that webinar. And then we'll have on the Wednesday after that, we've got 22 EdTech Capabilities Reboot, which is a 2-part series. And then the following week will be part 2 of that one. So please join me next week for that. Also, for those awesome next week and the following weeks, we've got some awesome content coming up. Okay, have a lovely morning, evening, or afternoon, whoever you're watching this, whatever time you're watching the recording. And for those attending live, thank you so much for coming this afternoon, and we will hopefully see you all next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.